The Dragon Prince sat astride his warhorse, breathing in the sharp air that clung to the riverbanks of the Trident. The water beyond him roared in time with the pulse in his ears, as if the gods themselves had turned all their attention to this single, decisive moment. Rhaegar Targaryen felt the swirling currents within his own blood, the living legacy of his house. His black armor, inlaid with rubies at the breast, caught the waning light with a subdued glimmer. Each breath brought a cascade of thoughts that threatened to unravel into a tangle of anxieties and dreams. But there was no time for those. In war, the intangible always threatened to fade beneath the crush of swords and the spatter of blood. He tightened his grip on the reins and leaned forward. The roar of men, steel, and horses had begun to echo over the rushing water. There, amid the ranks of loyalists and rebels, a single drum seemed to thunder, pounding to the same measure as his heart. They had come to this field for the reckoning. Years of dissatisfaction with the Mad King's rule had led to open rebellion. Across the battlefield, the host loyal to House Baratheon Stark and Arryn arrayed itself in tense lines, newly congealed alliances tested by the severity of war. The rebels had rallied behind the name of Robert Baratheon, that towering warrior rumored to possess a strength as monstrous as his warhammer was heavy. Rhaegar exhaled slowly. He knew the rumors of Robert's ferocity. He knew that on this day, the rebellion spirit would hinge on the man's presence, just as the royalists might well hinge on his own. He set his jaw, recalling the frightened whispers of his father's violence, the paranoia that had sown dragonfire in the hearts of thousands. Somewhere within the depths of the Targaryen line, there had once been honor, dignity, and a sense of duty, values that Rhaegar cherished. He told himself he was here to restore them, to fight for a future where he might guide the realm more gently than his father ever could. The call to advance rang out over the battlefield. The loyalists surged forward, their own lines of cavalry charging across the field to meet the rebels. The sense of churned earth, sweat, and terror crowded Rhaegar's nose, and he lifted his gaze from the trampled reeds to mark his foe. Across the skirmish, he spotted the distinctive antlered helm, the note of gold and black that announced Robert Baratheon like a banner. The sight of it set a tremor in Rhaegar's limbs. Excitement, dread, anger. He remembered how the story had spread that Robert named him a thief, called him the cause of this war. But Rhaegar had believed it was more complicated than that, had believed he acted out of love or destiny. Perhaps he had erred. Perhaps he had not. That was a puzzle that would remain, overshadowed now by the clang and crash of an unfolding engagement. Soldiers collided, flailing swords, spears, and shields in a frenzied cacophony of war. Rhaegar drove his horse forward, urging the massive creature to pick up speed, aware that in this swirling chaos, only a fierce and direct confrontation with Robert could settle the rebellion's outcome. He spotted the man's broad shoulders, that hammer raised high. Even from a distance, it looked capable of crushing a man's ribcage. And Robert's voice reached him. Hoarse, exultant, primal. That voice cut through the haze of fighting men, and Rhaegar spurred his horse toward it. He felt no time pass between his decision and the moment he found himself face to face with Robert Baratheon. Swords and halberds parted, as if they dared not stand between these two storms about to collide. Robert's eyes shone with a challenge. The corners of his mouth curled in a savage grin. In the swirling dust and sunlight, Rhaegar observed the iron determination etched into every line of Robert's face. They did not speak. The moment for words was lost. Rage and an almost noble sorrow coursed through Rhaegar as he brought his sword up. Robert hefted his warhammer with both hands, his powerful arms tensing. Their horses circled, plumes of breath ghosting from wide nostrils. The chaotic battle around them ebbed and flowed, but the men nearby seemed dimly aware that here, in the clash of Targaryen prince and rebellious lord, the fate of the realm might be decided. Robert swung first. The hammer cut the air with a terrifying hiss, and Rhaegar had to pivot his horse aside, twisting his torso to avoid the blow. He countered by slashing down at Robert's shoulder, but Robert angled the hammer's haft, blocking with a jarring clang of steel. Energy coursed through them both, savage intensity forging them into primal adversaries. For an instant, their eyes locked. Two men warring not only for crowns and causes, but for their own sense of destiny. They broke apart, each breathing heavily, horses stamping the ground, though the men had no time for fatigue. Robert launched another assault, a broadside blow that, if it connected, might splinter armor. Rhaegar wheeled away, though not unscathed. The reverberation of steel hammered through him, rattling in his gauntlet. Grunting, Rhaegar seized the opening and slashed along Robert's unprotected forearm, but Robert twisted, and the blow glanced off chainmail, drawing blood but not debilitating the man. The time for half measures faded. Rage sparked in Robert's eyes. He roared, spurring his horse, bringing the hammer around in a savage arc. Steel crashed against steel. Rhaegar's sword shuddered from the impact, and he was forced to twist his body in the saddle to keep from being unseated. A new wave of anxious tension gripped him. Robert's strength was no myth. The stag was near unstoppable, it seemed. Yet the prince was swift. He used the momentum to slip to Robert's flank. Leaning low in the saddle, Rhaegar thrust for Robert's midsection. The hammer responded, colliding with Rhaegar's blade in a flash of sparks. Robert roared again and reined his mount around, swinging at Rhaegar's head. But Rhaegar was practiced, balanced on the horse as though born to it, his posture a product of the best training in the land. He deflected the blow once more, forcing Robert's hammer to slide off his sword with an ear-splitting screech of metal. Robert lurched in the saddle, hooking his leg around to stay upright, cursing. For a tense instant, they were nearly face to face, each man's expression twisted by fury. And something more. Loss, perhaps. Rhaegar's blood thrummed. His father's madness had spurred this war, but he knew he could not blame all of it on the Mad King. There were choices Rhaegar himself had made, and now here was Robert, who might have been a friend in some other life. But this was the life the gods had given them, and so they fought. Robert regained his seat and spat onto the ground. "Craven princeling," he growled. His voice was hoarse, ragged, as though it had rung out too many war cries in the last days. Then he struck again, with the same monstrous power that had shattered the loyalist lines in so many lesser engagements. But Rhaegar, though battered, still possessed the instincts of a champion. As Robert's hammer came crashing down, Rhaegar caught the haft close to the head with the quillins of his sword. The impact forced him to grit his teeth. The shock vibrated all the way through his arm. The standstill lasted only a blink, but a heartbeat in war was everything. He twisted his blade, forcing the hammer aside, and roared as he slashed forward. The blow found Robert's torso, rending mail, and Rhaegar heard the man grunt. Blood ran, but Robert was still upright, still strong. Robert seized that moment to bash Rhaegar with his shield, a savage blow that sent the prince reeling in the saddle. The taste of copper filled Rhaegar's mouth as he bit the inside of his cheek. His sword arm wavered under the shock, but Rhaegar reclaimed himself. In one fluid motion he drew himself upright, and the tip of his sword darted for Robert's thigh. Metal bit flesh, and Robert cursed, spurring his horse to ram into Rhaegar's. The beasts collided, rearing, and both men nearly toppled. Rhaegar snatched the reins, leaning close to his mount's neck. Robert scowled through the visor slit of his battered helm, raised his hammer again, and brought it down with cataclysmic force. This time, Rhaegar could not fully parry. He managed to angle his sword in such a way as to deflect the blow from his head, but the hammer struck his shoulder and chest. He felt a crack, a blaze of agony. One of the rubies embedded in his armor shattered, scattering shards that glinted in the light. He gasped, eyes wide, struggling to keep from toppling off his horse. Pain radiated through his side. His gaze blurred. For a moment he saw the battlefield in dull gray shapes, the men on foot, the cavalry swirling, the standard of the Targaryen dragon. He tasted fear, metallic, almost like blood. If that hammer fell upon him again in such a way, he might not rise. Summoning his will, he seized the hilt with renewed ferocity. Robert advanced, hungry to finish him. But Rhaegar caught the hammer's downward sweep once more in a desperate clash, and with the last reserves of his strength, he angled his sword in a risky maneuver, hooking the head of the hammer. Then he thrust forward, blade tip leading the way, to stab directly for a gap in Robert's breastplate. Blade found flesh and bone, It slid through Robert's side, near his ribs, deep enough that the rebel lord's face twisted with shock, his mouth falling open in a silent exhalation. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Rhaegar wrenched his blade free. He saw a bright cascade of blood. Robert's hammer slipped from his grip, and he teetered in the saddle, breath rasping. They locked eyes, something like dawning disbelief passing across Robert's face. Then Robert's mount sidestepped, and Robert Baratheon, the man who led a rebellion that shook the Seven Kingdoms, tumbled from the saddle onto the red-stained ground of the Trident. Time itself wavered. Rhaegar felt cold spreading from his shoulder to his neck, as though the swirl of the river had cast a chill across his soul. The men around them paused, glancing from the bloodied prince to the fallen rebel. Rhaegar tried to breathe, tried to quell the tremor coursing through him. He glanced down at Robert's unmoving form, at the hammered metal of that iconic helm. The man did not stir, only bled. The swirl of the battle pressed in again. Curses and howls rose from Robert's men, and in that chaos, Rhaegar realized he had ended more than a life. He had changed a history yet unwritten. For a fleeting instant, there was no time to reflect on the meaning of this. The clash of arms resumed around him. Loyalist forces, seeing the rebel leader fall, surged with new vigor, while the rebel lines, stunned by their champion's downfall, hesitated. The outcome of the day was tipping. Pain racked Rhaegar's body, but he knew there was no space for weakness now. He drew up his horse, lifting his sword for all to see. The rubies on his breastplate chipped and smeared with dirt and blood. He shouted something, a half-broken war cry. His men roared with him, rallying as the tide turned against the rebellious host. Steel rang out on steel. The groans of the wounded filled the air. A swirl of dust coated the grass and the bank of the river, tinted pink by the reflection of setting sunlight, as if even the sky were unsure whether to burn gold or red this day. Minutes passed as Rhaegar pressed into the fray, ignoring the growing ache in his side, stepping in where the loyalist line sagged. Word spread that Robert Baratheon had fallen. Some rebels fought on in blind fury, unwilling to admit defeat. Others broke ranks, terror snapping the nerve that had once held them firm. Here and there, a rebel cavalry officer would attempt a countercharge, only to be met by a wave of shields and pikes. The momentum was all in favor of the dragon now. Eventually, as darkness threatened to descend, Rhaegar realized the rebels were shattered. The remains of their forces withdrew in chaotic clumps, some crossing the ford in desperate flight, others surrendering on their knees. In the distance, in the final glimmer of dying sunlight, he glimpsed a tall figure in battered plate. Eddard Stark, perhaps, rallying what survivors he could. But the field was lost. The war might yet continue, but for now, the rebels had suffered a grievous blow. Rhaegar rode toward the place where Robert had fallen, bracing a hand against his breastplate where the shattered ruby had cut into him. With each movement, he felt the jagged edge biting deeper. The ring of soldiers, friend and foe alike, parted to let him through. He dismounted, legs trembling beneath him, and stood over the body. Robert lay still, eyes half open. The man's chest bore a ragged wound, caked now in drying blood, and there was no sign of breath. Rhaegar felt a wash of conflicting emotion. All he had heard, all he had feared, and all he might have admired in this man, lay silent at his feet. He knelt, ignoring the protests of his battered body. He set a hand on Robert's cooling brow, and in a moment of grim respect, he closed the man's eyes. All the illusions about what might have been said, all the scornful words from the taverns about who had stolen whom, none of it mattered now. A strange hush fell over the circle of watchers. Rhaegar found himself murmuring a quiet farewell, a half-formed apology that mingled with the dust. Then, a loyalist captain approached, clearing his throat. Rhaegar rose to his feet, the reek of blood thick around him, and told them to treat Robert's body with dignity. Even if the man had led a rebellion, he deserved that much. He gave instructions for the Baratheon banner to be placed over Robert's remains, so that any who came near might know where he lay. The men moved carefully around the body, and the hush that had settled did not quite break. The day's victory was overshadowed by a sense of awe, or perhaps a sense of finality. The storm had broken on the Trident's banks. Night fell. Torches sprang up like new stars across the battlefield, weaving along the lines of tents and the huddled masses of wounded. Rhaegar found himself slumped on a three-legged stool in his own pavilion, stripped to the waist, while a maester fussed over his injuries. The wound from Robert's hammer had bruised bone, and there was a shallow gash beneath one of the fractured rubies. Rhaegar winced at the sting of ointment. The maester's hands shook slightly as he cleaned away the dried blood. Outside, the night air crackled with tension. On the one hand, Rhaegar's men were exultant. Today's victory promised to tilt the entire war in their favor. But the hush around the prince's tent suggested a deeper uncertainty. They had won the field by slaying the rebellion's figurehead. Yet the war was not necessarily ended. What if House Stark or House Arryn refused to bend? What if House Tully and House Martell found new cause? Rhaegar's mind swarmed with concerns about the next steps. He did not want to see more bloodshed. And how would the realm react to the news of Robert Baratheon's death? When the maester finished, Rhaegar gingerly pulled on a fresh shirt, ignoring the twinges of pain in his shoulder. He let his silver blonde hair fall loose about his face. His face felt drawn, older than a day ago. Exhaustion gnawed at him, and then he heard the quiet voice of Sir Jon Darry, who waited at the entrance of the tent. The knight bowed his head. "There are prisoners, your grace. Some lesser lords who've yielded, a few knights taken in the battle." Rhaegar gestured for him to continue. "Some are begging to see you. Others are cursing your name. And there's rumor Eddard Stark has fled, rallying the remainder. Our outriders confirm a group of northerners, led by Stark, are retreating northward at speed, bearing their dead." Rhaegar closed his eyes. In the swirl of fatigue, he saw images of the tower where he had left his most precious secret, glimpses of the realm in flames. He forced his mind to the present. "We will not deny terms to those who yield," he said, his voice subdued. "Let them keep their honor if they will swear loyalty. But as for Eddard Stark, I must speak with him, somehow. He loved Robert like a brother. There may be no peace with the North if I cannot reason with him." Jon Darry exhaled. "Your grace, he may not wish to speak to you. You slew his friend. The hatred will be bone deep. I fear he will seek vengeance." "No." Rhaegar did not deny it. He felt the weight of many regrets, though that was not something to share aloud. Instead, he asked for quiet. Jon Darry bowed and departed, leaving Rhaegar alone in the flickering torchlight. Outside, the faint moans of the wounded drifted through the canvas walls. Beyond that, the triumphant shouts of soldiers celebrating a victory. In the distance, the Trident still rushed, unmindful of the day's carnage. Rhaegar finally slipped into a restless sleep, disturbed by nightmares of Robert's eyes staring at him, and of flames raging from the Red Keep as his father unleashed wildfire upon the city. Dawn broke eventually, weak and pale. Rhaegar emerged to find that the Loyalist army was already disposing of the dead. Cookfires and funeral pyres dotted the edges of the field. A pall of smoke hovered overhead, carrying with it the smell of burned hair and flesh, a smell that no amount of fresh breeze could fully disperse. He made his way down toward the wide stretch of muddy ground where fallen men had been gathered. He glimpsed the somber line of Loyalist soldiers, taking inventory of each corpse and marking them with the crests of their houses, so that families might eventually reclaim them. Rhaegar paused at the covered body that he knew belonged to Robert. A pair of knights stood guard over it, as if they feared the man might rise. The gold and black of House Baratheon's banner was draped across his chest. Rhaegar knelt again, ignoring the protest in his bruised ribs, and laid a hand on that banner, the other on the hilt of his sword in silent vigil. Some part of him sought forgiveness, though from whom he could not say. He remembered the last time he had looked upon Robert, at a tourney perhaps. There had been laughter then, Robert laughing, every inch the boisterous warrior with a hearty appetite for life. Had the seeds of war already been sown, or could there have been some chance to unify the kingdom without bloodshed? Had the pursuit of a single woman and the monstrous acts of a tyrant king condemned them all? He rose stiffly, exhaling a shaky breath, and turned away. Rhaegar spent the morning in discussion with his generals. The Loyalist camp was abuzz with the sense that the rebellion's back was broken. But Rhaegar cautioned them. "Robert is dead," he said. But that does not mean the end of defiance. He spoke gently, but with the quiet authority he had discovered in himself as a young man. Jon and Arryn remains, and so does Eddard Stark. Each still commands a portion of their lords. And the child of House Baratheon, Robert's brother Stannis, may find a reason to continue if the right alliances form. And war secondly. Enigo? The generals murmured among themselves. Ser Barristan Selmy, in attendance despite his own injuries from an earlier battle, bowed his head to Rhaegar. Your Grace, you have led us to victory. Let us capitalize. If we move swiftly, King's Landing will stand secure. Jon Arryn may sue for peace rather than continue a war without the rebellion's figurehead. And if Eddard Stark refuses, we can isolate him. Bensarnda. Rhaegar listened, all the while aware that the man who actually sat on the Iron Throne was his father, the Mad King. And what would the king do, now that Robert Baratheon had been slain? Would he see it as a sign that the realm would again fear the Targaryen name, or would he revel in new terrors? Rhaegar's father had no sense of moderation. He might demand the heads of half the lords in Westeros to quell his paranoia. That possibility chilled Rhaegar to the core. He had begun this war believing that by taking the field, by winning, he could bring about a kinder peace. If only he could remove his father from power, or at least keep him at bay. But he was uncertain how to achieve that now, with the entire realm in tumult. He placed a hand on Ser Barristan's shoulder. We must do what we can to end this peacefully, Rhaegar said. Too many have died already. Ser Barristan nodded, but the doubt in his eyes suggested he knew, as Rhaegar did, that King Aerys would not be easily swayed from violence. By midday, ravens had been sent. Missives carried the news. Robert Baratheon was slain. The rebel forces defeated in a great battle on the Trident, though some remained unaccounted for. Rhaegar penned letters to House Arryn, to House Stark, even to House Tully, entreating them to stand down and avoid further bloodshed. He tried to find words that might move them, offering pardons and vowing to address grievances. He acknowledged that the king's madness had driven them to rebellion, and that there must be a better way forward. But even as he sealed the wax with the Targaryen sigil, he knew that writing the king's madness was not a cure. Aerys had already begun raining death upon traitors, real or imagined, within King's Landing. Rhaegar had heard rumors of men burned alive in the throne room. He had heard that Tywin Lannister had thus far stayed aloof, uncertain which side to join, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Even the prince's victory might not be enough to coax that lion out of its lair. Afternoon shadows stretched as Rhaegar walked among the wounded. He had changed into simpler garments, though his hair still marked him as Targaryen royalty. He paused to offer words of comfort to those who had fought, loyalist and rebel alike. Some cursed him in ragged voices. Others reached out for a steadying hand. He did what he could, though the weight of their suffering pressed heavily upon him. Near the edges of the medical tents, a woman in soiled clothing knelt by a wounded rebel soldier, tears streaking her face as she pressed a cloth to his stomach. She looked up in surprise to see the prince himself. Rhaegar saw terror and anger in her eyes, as if she blamed him for what was happening to her beloved. He did not shy away from that gaze. He simply crouched beside her and helped secure a fresh bandage from the nearest supply, holding his own revulsion at the sight of the soldier's torn flesh. Despite the rancor, he told her that maesters were on their way. She said nothing. He didn't know if she recognized the gesture, or if she would ever forgive him for the war that had claimed so many. But he had to make the attempt. It was at least a start on a long path towards something resembling atonement. He left them and returned to his pavilion, feeling the exhaustion creeping up again. But he forced himself to remain alert. Lords and commanders came to consult with him, to offer their own plans for swift retribution. He listened, forcing patience. At times, he retreated behind the regal calm he had learned for public occasions, hearing their words, measuring them, and delivering reasoned responses. But inside, conflict raged. He had killed Robert Baratheon, slain the legendary Stormlord, and in so doing, perhaps sealed a new doom upon the realm if he could not navigate the next steps carefully. He envisioned wildfires started by his father's paranoia, or retribution from outraged houses. Or perhaps, by some miracle, he could steer the realm toward peace. He was not sure which outcome would prove more likely. That evening, as a pale moon rose behind drifting clouds, the Loyalist army made camp. Sentinels maintained watch along the perimeter, for they could not be certain the rebels would not attempt a night assault in desperation. Rhaegar was served a simple meal, a bowl of stew and a heel of bread. He barely tasted it. Memories of the day battered him, relentless as the hammer that had nearly destroyed his shoulder. He set aside the empty bowl, pulled on a heavier cloak, and slipped out of his tent. The night air was cool, with a faint breeze whispering through the flapping canvases. He walked without guards, though from the respectful nods of the sentries, it was clear they recognized him. He made his way past the line of pickets, crossing a small ditch that separated the main camp from a row of torches staked in the ground at the water's edge. Out here, the Trident's flow was more subdued, though still swift. The moonlight danced on the surface, enchanting and eerie. He paused to listen to the water's hush, letting it fill the silence that clung to him. Somewhere behind him, a twig snapped. Instinctively, he turned, hand going to his sword, but it was only Sir Barristan. The old knight approached, helm cradled in one arm, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. Rhaegar let out a long breath and lowered his guard. "I feared for your safety, my prince," Sir Barristan said gently. "I saw you slipping away." "I mean no harm to myself, if that's your concern," Rhaegar replied, a faint irony in his voice. The battles of the day had drained him. His soul felt raw. Sir Barristan bowed. "Your grace, you did what you must. Robert Baratheon would have killed you, had you faltered a moment longer." "Then?" Rhaegar looked out at the shimmering water. "It troubles me, Selmy. He was a man of fire and force, beloved by many. He might have made a good king, if the wheel of fate had turned differently." Then he let the words fade into the night. He clasped his hands behind his back, shoulders sagging beneath the cloak. The knight stepped closer, choosing his words with care. "You are the rightful prince. You are the hope House Targaryen has, not the Mad King. Men speak well of you, even among the rebels, I've heard. They say you have a compassionate spirit, if you would only act on it." "Then?" Rhaegar shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "Compassion doesn't stop hammers. Compassion doesn't halt steel from biting flesh. In the end, we kill each other all the same. Yet you showed mercy today," said Sir Barristan. "You gave the order to take prisoners unharmed and to treat the wounded on both sides." Rhaegar hesitated, looking at the sky. A swirl of clouds rolled past the moon, veiling it momentarily. "A small mercy," he said quietly. "The realm has lost much. Lyanna Stark, I never intended. There is too much blood." "Man." Sir Barristan said nothing, wisely sensing the turbulence in the prince's heart. Finally, Rhaegar turned to the knight. "I must return to King's Landing," he said. "It is time to confront my father, to put an end to these horrors before any more befall us. If Eddard Stark or Jon Arryn come south with vengeance in mind, we must be prepared. But I still hope we can reason with them, reach some accord that spares further devastation." Sir Barristan inclined his head. "As you say, Your Grace, I will stand beside you." He paused. "But be wary. The king's trust in you is uncertain." Rhaegar understood. Aerys loathed the idea that even his son might be plotting to supplant him. In the king's madness, the entire world was an enemy. Standing there on the river's bank, Rhaegar felt the weight of 1,000 choices. Perhaps if he had made different ones, Robert Baratheon would be alive, and the Seven Kingdoms would not be on the brink of ruin. But regrets were a poison he could not afford. The realm needed a healer, and the only cure he suspected might be the removal of his father from the throne. Yet how to accomplish that without igniting a new conflagration? He thanked Sir Barristan for his counsel and stood in silence for a while longer, letting the hush of the Trident flow around him. At length, he returned to his tent, where his dreams offered little solace, only flashes of red and black, and the faint echoing hammer blow that never quite faded. By the next morning, the Loyalist army had begun to break camp, dividing into separate forces. One group would remain to secure the area, ensuring no resurgence of rebellion sprang up among the local lord. Another contingent, led by Rhaegar, would ride south, back to the capital. As the Prince of Dragonstone, he would need to muster the city's defenses, quell any further uprisings, and most challenging of all, manage his father's temper. The battered survivors in the loyalist camp murmured uneasy oaths of fealty to him. Some who had once been rebellious knights were now uncertain. Others quietly swore that they would not lay down arms, not yet. The day was overcast, a sullen grayness settling upon the land as if the skies mourned. Horses stamped the earth, knights inspected straps, and men-at-arms formed ranks. Before mounting his own horse, Rhaegar took a final moment to stand over the body of Robert Baratheon. The remains were packed in a wooden cart, ready to be sent south or to Storm's End, wherever the Baratheons might choose to lay him to rest. Rhaegar bowed his head, ignoring the stares from those around. He felt the cold press of the breeze on his cheeks, and then biting back the ache in his chest and shoulder, he walked away. He swung onto his stallion, adjusting the cloak around him. His black armor had been repaired as best it could, but the missing ruby at the breast served as a bleak reminder of how close he had come to death. Slowly, the column marched. Standard-bearers hoisted the Targaryen sigil high, the three-headed dragon on a field of black, letting it snap in the breeze. A hush lay over the men, as if they all walked in the shadow of some unspoken fear. Victory, yes, but the realm was not at peace. They rode for hours. The roads churned to mud by the passage of thousands of feet. Villages along the way stood silent, windows shuttered, fearful peasants hiding from the approach of any army. Rhaegar glimpsed more than once the pale, hollow faces of women and children peering through cracks in the walls, but no one emerged to greet them. In times like these, any soldiers on the horizon might be rapacious as the Dothraki. Rhaegar heard the men muttering about the gloom, the threat of new storms. He forced himself to remain upright, to keep his posture regal, even though every jolt of the horse pained his shoulder. He needed to project an aura of leadership, to reassure the loyalist host that they had a purpose. Night fell. They made camp near a copse of bent trees, their twisted limbs reaching like old bones into the night sky. Rhaegar set his tent apart from most, with only a handful of the king's guard posted. He did not relish company. Even so, Ser Barristan, Ser Jon Darry, and a few other trusted knights convened briefly. They spoke of logistics, the supply lines, the men who had deserted from the rebel ranks and were now seeking sanctuary, the possibility of Stark's forces regrouping somewhere in the Riverlands. Rhaegar listened, gave orders to treat any who surrendered with fairness, to avoid pillaging. He ended by instructing them to send out scouts, watch for stragglers, but do not provoke conflict unless necessary. The meeting ended. The knights withdrew, though Rhaegar caught their uneasy glances. Alone again, Rhaegar lay on the cot, eyes open in the darkness. Wind rustled the canvas. He wondered if word had reached Lyanna's ears, if she still lived. A pang of guilt sharpened in his chest. He had begun this war believing in a prophecy, in the promise of a prince that was promised. He had taken Lyanna, thinking to shape a better future for the realm. Now Robert was dead. How would Lyanna feel? Robert had once been her betrothed, and though Rhaegar told himself that she did not truly love him, that question haunted him. He knew from the depth of her spirit that she would grieve for all that was lost in the swirl of conflict. He closed his eyes. Sleep overcame him in ragged intervals. Dreams flickered, shifting between memories of the Tower of Joy, the hush of wind in the high mountains, and the vision of a battlefield strewn with broken rubies. He heard a child's cry, faint and echoing, as if from a great distance, and somewhere, behind it all, laughter. A woman's laughter, mingled with a thunderous voice calling his name. Morning came. The sun was hidden behind clouds, but the day began regardless. Rhaegar and his company continued south, crossing war-torn farmland, where battered fences lay in tangles. The peasants had fled or hidden themselves. On one occasion, as they rode past a burned homestead, Rhaegar dismounted to inspect the remains. He found signs of a struggle, bits of a battered weapon, smears of dried blood. Likely, Bandits or desperate rebels had looted this place after the main forces moved on. His men exchanged looks of grim resignation. War consumed everything in its path. In the late afternoon, a rider galloped into camp, spattered with mud, leading a half-dozen men. They were outriders, scouts who had ventured ahead. Breathless, the lead man knelt before the prince. He relayed that Eddard Stark and a band of Northmen were indeed traveling north, bearing Robert's banners draped in black as they retreated. They had not engaged in any more pitched battles, but they had scorned attempts at parley. Rhaegar felt no surprise. He nodded, dismissing the man to get rest. In his heart he carried a flicker of hope that perhaps, once the anger cooled, Eddard Stark might recognize that continuing the rebellion was futile. Still, the path of vengeance was a strong motivator. Rhaegar would not dare discount it. They pressed on. Days blurred. The pain in Rhaegar's side eased slightly under the maester's care, though he still favored it. Each evening, he penned more letters, trying to keep the lines of communication open. He thought often of what steps he could take once he reached King's Landing. Aerys was unlikely to greet him with joy. The king might even see Rhaegar's triumph as a threat, as if the prince's popularity would overshadow the father's power. But for the sake of the realm, Rhaegar intended to stand firm. He would do whatever was necessary to prevent more bloodshed. Yet the question loomed: what was necessary? Would he need to depose his own father? That path was fraught with danger. House Targaryen was already precariously balanced, but if the alternative was more senseless slaughter, Rhaegar knew where his duty lay, and always, at the back of his mind, the image of Robert Baratheon haunted him. The stag brought down by the dragon. A sign, perhaps, that House Targaryen would endure. Or maybe just another tragedy in a realm that had seen too many. Rhaegar rode on, leading the battered host through the war-torn roads of the Crownlands, uncertain of what the morrow would bring, but determined that it would not be the inferno of madness his father might unleash. If there was any chance to heal the realm, he intended to seize it, even if it cost him everything. The host continued south along the King's Road, moving under a sky that threatened rain at every turn. Days passed in slow procession. Armed riders traveled at the front and rear of the procession, flanking columns of foot soldiers still bearing the scars of the Trident. Many were missing helms or carried weapons splintered nearly to uselessness, but none questioned the prince's order to press onward. In the wagons, the wounded jostled with every rut in the road, muffled groans darkening the mood of an already weary host. Each dawn found them a little more haggard, and yet Rhaegar pressed on, driven by a restless certainty that every delay risked new calamities for the realm. He tried not to dwell on how long it would take for Eddard Stark to rally other rebels, or on whether the North would ever yield. He focused instead on the next step: re-entering King's Landing. He knew it might prove more treacherous than any field of battle. The Mad King's paranoia, stoked by ravens bearing news of Rhaegar's victory, would burn fiercer than ever. And behind the throne, webs of intrigue were always spinning. Rhaegar felt them waiting for him like an invisible net, each thread glistening in potential betrayal or violence. On the 8th day since leaving the battlefield, a smudge of smoke appeared on the horizon. It clung low over the land, too constant to be mere cookfires. Rhaegar sensed the tension in the ranks as riders pointed it out. The city lay just beyond those hills, a sprawl of walls and towers rising on the black water. The last leagues passed under a hush, broken only by the measured tread of horses and the groan of wagon wheels. Finally they crossed a ridge, and King's Landing sprawled below like a beast uncoiled by the river. The brick and timber houses huddled around the great walls, the 7 gates that cut through them. Thick columns of grayish smoke rose from the city's chimneys, merging with the low clouds overhead. Rhaegar reined in beside Ser Barristan, who studied the city's silhouette. Even at a distance, the Red Keep's towers were unmistakable. Perched on Egan's high hill, like a looming sentinel, they descended along the well-worn road that twisted through farmland turned to mud. Villagers saw the approach of their standard, Targaryen black, and cast uncertain glances. Some retreated indoors, slamming shutters. Others gathered in small clusters to watch, perhaps half expecting an army of horrors. Whispers of the Mad King's cruelty were on everyone's lips, and the passing of any large company of soldiers meant fear. As they neared the towering city gate, the gold cloaks of the city watch shuffled into position. They were plainly anxious, scanning the approaching lines of armed men. At the head rode Rhaegar, flanked by the white-cloaked Kingsguard. His battered armor had been polished, though nothing could hide the dents left by Robert's hammer blows, nor could the missing ruby be replaced. The watchers on the walls couldn't help but notice the prince's firm posture as he guided his mount closer. They reached the gate, and the captain of the watch stepped forward, bowing in a theatrical display of obeisance. Rhaegar merely nodded. No horns announced his return. No joyous throng greeted him. The city seemed tense, uncertain. Yet word had traveled fast, and common folk peered from behind corners or half-open doors, curious about the army filing in. Rhaegar led them along the cramped streets. Filthy puddles reflected the overcast light, and the breeze carried the scents of the capital. Rotting refuse, cooking oil, and the tang of the Blackwater's brackish tide. People whispered as they saw the state of the soldiers, the bandaged wounds, the hollow eyes. For some, relief mingled with that anxiety. Relief that the prince had emerged victorious, that the rebellion might be quashed. But others, who had seen too many burnings ordered by Aerys, looked upon the returning host with dread. Rhaegar felt the weight of those gazes. The Red Keep's gates opened, revealing a courtyard patrolled by a double column of gold cloaks. Rhaegar dismounted, letting a stable boy lead away his horse. Ser Barristan, Ser Yon Dari, and several other knights followed. The court awaited them. A hush fell over the onlookers. Past the courtyard, across the stone walkway, the great doors of the throne room stood open. Torches flickered inside. Rhaegar fought the urge to show any hesitation. He lifted his chin, though pain flared in his healing shoulder, and walked across the courtyard. A few courtiers in their finery, the king's sycophants, hovered by the doors, whispering behind hands. Rhaegar ignored them. He entered the throne room with measured steps. Torchlight and flickering braziers cast shifting shadows on the high vaulted ceiling. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, a jagged silhouette of twisted metal. Upon it sat King Aerys de Segarnian, his white hair unkempt, tangling around a gaunt face, etched with suspicion. The king's nails gripped the arms of the throne. Two of his Kingsguard stood at attention below, their faces stony behind gleaming helms. Aerys's eyes glinted with a feverish sheen. Rhaegar advanced, stopping halfway between the towering pillars and the dais. Custom demanded he kneel, but he hesitated, uncertain how Aerys would respond to any sign of either defiance or submission. At last, Rhaegar inclined his head, but he did not drop to both knees. He stood tall, feeling the hush deepen around them as the king stared down. "My loyal son returns," Aerys said, his voice rasping with a brittle edge. "He returns victorious, or so the ravens say. Yet I wonder if it is my victory or his." No formal greeting. No thanks for ending the rebellion's greatest threat. Rhaegar felt the tension coil between his shoulder blades. He forced composure, lifting his gaze to meet Aerys's. "Your Grace, the rebel Robert Baratheon is slain." The rebel host shattered. "I bring victory to the Iron Throne." Aerys leaned forward slightly, nails clicking on the metal arms. Yes, my informers told me. But I recall how it was you who let the rebellion thrive in the first place. Did you not run off to dally with a wolf girl, leaving your father to face traitors alone?" "No. And Rhaegar felt the sting of the words, but he forced himself not to react. He sensed that a misstep might bring the king's paranoia crashing down like wildfire. "I fought for the crown at the Trident, risking my life. My only aim is to preserve your realm, and our house," he said, carefully measured. Aerys's eyes flickered down to the damage in Rhaegar's armor. A twisted grin danced on the king's lips. "You nearly died, or so they say. Dat Goddo. And yet, we cannot lose you now, can we? My enemies multiply. Even if one is dead, his pack remains. The wolves and falcons conspire still." He breathed heavily through his nose. "They write to me, offering me hostages, but I see the lies behind their words. Traitors. All of them." He motioned abruptly. and a slight figure stepped from the shadows along the throne room's side. Varys, the master of whisperers. His silken slippers made no sound on the stone floor. He bowed deeply. "My king, I have done as you asked. I have ferreted out the plots in the city. They remain contained, but rumor spreads quickly. Many wonder about the fate of the rebels who have surrendered." "Nidad Moida." Aerys waved a dismissive hand, still watching Rhaegar. "They will burn, of course. Perhaps not all. We must set an example. But first," his mouth twitched as if tasting something foul. "First, I must see whether my beloved son has returned as a loyal subject or as an aspiring usurper." Rhaegar felt his pulse throb in his throat. "I come only to serve, father." Aerys's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Then the king let out a rasping laugh, high-pitched and mirthless. "Your loyalty pleases me. I was told by some that you might come to seize my throne, but it seems they were wrong. Good. You have done well in dispatching that usurper's dog." He shifted on the throne. "You should rest, my prince. Though do not rest too easily. The war is not done. I have tasks for you. You will learn of them soon enough." Rhaegar bowed his head, acknowledging the dismissal. Then he turned on his heel and strode out, every inch of him thrumming with a quiet, cold anger. The presence of the Mad King pressed upon him like a vulture's shadow. He could feel the stares of courtiers, gold cloaks, and sycophants who lingered near the dais. None dared speak until he had gone. He returned to his old apartments in Maegor's Holdfast, a section of the keep with thick walls and well-guarded corridors. The moment the heavy door closed behind him, he slumped against the wooden frame, exhaling. He'd survived the initial audience, though it left him shaken. He could see the mania swirling in Aerys's eyes. Any further sign of independence might trigger the king to lash out at his own son. Rhaegar pressed his hand to his forehead, feeling the old wound in his shoulder ache again. He reminded himself there would be time enough to plot carefully, some means of saving the realm from more terror. He called for a bath and servants hurried in, eyes lowered, to pour heated water into a copper tub. Steam rose, clouding the air. Rhaegar stripped off the battered armor, wincing at the bruises beneath. His hair hung limp about his face, sweat and grime from the road blending with the ghosts of dried blood near the edges of the padding he wore beneath the plate. He settled into the water, hissing at the sting of old wounds, letting the heat seep into his aching muscles. As he washed, images drifted through his mind. The bleak battlefield by the Trident, the moment his sword thrust through Robert's ribs. So many men had died in that one clash, their bodies left to the river's slow current or to shallow graves. He thought of Eddard Stark, who had been the second face of the rebellion after Robert. With Robert gone, could Ned Stark's resolve be broken, or would it harden into unyielding revenge? Rhaegar was not sure. The honorable man he had briefly met in passing, years before, seemed entirely capable of forging a new rebellion, if only for the sake of avenging the friend he had loved like a brother. He recalled Lyanna. A pang of regret and tenderness welled up. He had not seen her for many moons, and the fate of her unborn child, his child, haunted him. In the swirl of war, he had convinced himself that her safety lay hidden away. But if hostilities persisted, nowhere in the realm was truly safe, least of all for the woman who had been the spark that set the kingdoms ablaze. When the bathwater cooled, Rhaegar rose, allowing servants to pat him dry. He dismissed them with a wave. Pulling on simple clothing, he found the old silver harp that rested in a corner chest. He ran his fingers over the strings but did not play. The weapon in his hand was only music, powerless to quell the nightmares swirling around him. He placed it gently aside, called for a goblet of watered wine, and tried to compose himself. That night, as darkness draped the city, he ventured out from Maegor's Holdfast into the keep's corridors. He had to know what his father intended, had to glean every scrap of rumor. Though the King's Landing of his youth had once been his home, now it felt like a den of watchers and whispers. The hush of footsteps against cold stone raised the hairs on his arms. Guards, posted at intervals, snapped to attention as he passed, but their eyes held a wary glimmer, uncertain whether the prince was friend or a potential foe. He made for the library, a vast chamber cluttered with shelves of old tomes, dimly lit by lanterns swaying from iron brackets. He told the guards he wished to read, but in truth, he had arranged to meet a man there who knew more about the king's current mood than almost anyone. Lord Carlton Chelsted, the hand of the king, or at least the latest in that precarious position, for Aerys had gone through a string of hands after burning a few, discarding others. Chelsted had proven loyal, but not entirely blind, to the king's madness. When Rhaegar entered, he found the old lord standing near a table strewn with scrolls, worry etched into his brow. They nodded to each other in silent greeting, and Rhaegar crossed to him, glancing at the door to ensure it was closed. Chelsted's voice was low. "Your Grace, I have done what I can, but the king's mind is increasingly fevered. He sees enemies in every corner. More burnings are threatened. He confides in none but that pyromancer. Forgive me, I do not recall the man's name and Varys." Rhaegar's jaw tightened. "Rossard," he said. "The one with the green flames dancing in his eyes, always talking of wildfire." He had heard the man's name far too often of late. He recalled rumors that the king was ordering caches of wildfire placed beneath strategic points in the city. A madman's attempt to keep the population in check. But how much of that was rumor, and how much was horrifying truth? Chelsted sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Rossard and the Guild of Alchemists are never far from the king's side. I suspect they're fueling his worst impulses. He's been demanding new caches of wildfire to be readied, just in case. He threatened to raise half the city if any traitors rose from among the common folk." Rhaegar felt cold seeping into his bones. If he tries to unleash dragonfire upon the city, the realm itself may never recover. Chelsted nodded. "I have tried to dissuade him, but you know how it is. He trusts me little, if at all. My counsel falls on deaf ears. He half suspects I'm conspiring with you to overthrow him." The notion of open confrontation with his father gnawed at Rhaegar. He had waged war against Robert to protect the realm, hoping to prevent a cataclysm. But if Aerys' madness was allowed free rein, the realm would drown in blood and fire anyway. He fixed Chelsted with a measured look. "If it becomes clear that my father plans to burn King's Landing, would you stand with me to prevent it?" Chelsted's breath caught for an instant. "Your Grace, such talk is treason. But if the choice is between treason and the wholesale slaughter of innocents, I will do what I must." Rhaegar placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "I pray it never comes to that," he murmured. Then he turned away, scanning the room's high shelves for any lurking shapes. "Thank you, my lord. We must remain vigilant. For now, keep me informed of anything you learn." "Deren?" Chelsted lowered his head and slipped out, leaving Rhaegar alone with the flickering lanterns. Outside, the wind sighed in the towers. Rhaegar stared at the shadow his figure cast on the floor, thinking about how easily the Targaryen legacy could crumble, not from the swords of rebels, but from the fire set by a king determined to punish the entire realm for perceived disloyalty. Rhaegar knew the time for inaction was swiftly drawing to a close. He left the library soon after, moving through silent corridors. When he reached his apartments once more, he found Sir Barristan waiting just inside, standing at attention in his white cloak. "Got." The knight's expression was grave. "Your Grace, we have received word that Lord Tywin Lannister has mobilized forces at Casterly Rock," he said quietly. "He calls it a show of support for the Iron Throne. But it is said his host is large enough to do more than simply show support. We do not know which way the lion will roar." Rhaegar lowered himself into a seat by the table, feeling the weight of the day pressing down. Tywin Lannister had once been Aerys' hand, in a brighter age, when the king was not yet fully consumed by madness. But their parting had been acrimonious, and Tywin had retreated to the west with anger in his heart. Now that the realm was in turmoil, it made sense that the Lannister lord would seize the chance to position himself advantageously. "We must learn his true intentions," Rhaegar said, "but for now, let it be known that I welcome the support of any loyalist, including Lord Tywin. Perhaps if I treat with him directly, I can keep him from acts of opportunism." Sir Barristan bowed, As you will, my prince. Will you address the court regarding these matters? Rhaegar paused, remembering his father's suspicious stare. If he called the court together too boldly, Aerys might see it as a challenge. But there was no avoiding certain duties. The realm needed a firm hand that wasn't consumed by madness or vengeance. Yes, he said. In 2 days I will speak before the gathered lords as the Prince of Dragonstone. We must project unity lest the realm tear itself apart. Sir Barristan inclined his head. Understanding the risk, I will see it done. The knight withdrew, and Rhaegar felt the emptiness of the chamber more sharply than before. Rest would not come easily. He was caught between the madness of his father and the uncertain grudges of half the realm. Still, he reminded himself that he had pledged to try for peace, to bring a measure of stability to the kingdoms after so much slaughter. The cost might be high, but perhaps it was a burden fate had placed on his shoulders. He forced himself to lie down. The nights in King's Landing held their own brand of disquiet, filled with echoes of unsettled dogs barking in the streets, the scurry of rats, and the distant rattle of metal as the gold cloaks paced along the walls. Hours drifted by, and in the realm of uneasy dreams, he again saw glimpses of the Trident's bloody water, the glint of Robert's hammer, and the swirl of wildfire reflecting in Aerys's eyes. When dawn broke, he rose, splashed water on his face, and dressed in a somber doublet of black and red. Outside his windows, the city gradually woke. A mass of ordinary folk going about their meager business. For them, life continued under the shadow of war and the threat of the king's unpredictable wrath. Rhaegar resolved to visit the outer wards of the Red Keep that day, to show himself among the men who had returned with him, and to gauge their spirits. A swirl of activity filled the keep's courtyard as Rhaegar emerged. Soldiers who had marched south with him from the Trident looked no less battered than before. Some polished armor or sharpened blades. Others had found a patch of ground to sit upon while they ate cold rations. The sight of their prince brought them to quick attention, though the warmth in their eyes was tempered by lingering exhaustion. Rhaegar walked among them, inquiring after injuries, praising valor, offering small encouragements. He saw an older knight with bandaged hands kneeling by a younger squire, showing him how to maintain a sword's edge. He paused there, placing a hand lightly on the knight's shoulder. "You've done well to persevere. Get the healing you need," Rhaegar told him. "We must remain strong, for more trials may come." The knight inclined his head. "Aye, your grace. We will be ready." Rhaegar moved on, from cluster to cluster, until he reached a corner of the yard where he glimpsed the outline of a body draped in cloth. The stench of death was faint here, hidden by the pungent reek of the latrine pit nearby, but still tangible. He approached slowly, realizing it was one of his men who had succumbed overnight to festering wounds. 2 silent soldiers stood guard, uncertain what to do until orders were given. "He fought at the Trident, did he not?" Rhaegar asked softly. One guard nodded. "Yes, my prince. He took a spear through the gut. The maesters tried, but he passed in the night." Rhaegar felt a pang of regret. The cost of the war remained, still rearing its head with each new dawn. "Arrange for a respectful burial," he said. He served the realm. The soldiers bowed, relieved at the clarity of purpose. Rhaegar lingered a moment, offering a silent farewell. Once more he found himself thinking that the war had ended a man's life, not with the grand flourish of a final battle, but in a quiet, miserable corner of the city. This was the reality of all the glories and tragedies of kings and princes, a reality that seeped in and refused to be ignored. Afterward, he found Sir Jon Derry near the stables, speaking quietly with a group of knights. Rhaegar joined them, listening as they discussed the garrison's readiness. Reports had arrived that some lords sworn to House Tully, uncertain of the war's direction, were refusing to let the king's men cross their lands without paying gold. In the Vale, Jon Arryn's bannermen held their mountainous passes, seemingly unwilling to yield. In the Stormlands, confusion reigned. With Robert dead, the line of succession shifted to Stannis or Renly, but neither had made any bold move. Stannis, grim and dutiful, had retreated to Dragonstone with a small fleet, refusing to bend the knee. Renly, still a child, was under the care of courtiers at Storm's End. The region teetered in uncertainty. Rhaegar considered the map they unrolled on a crate top. House Tyrell still held the reach, nominally loyal, but quiet. Prince Doran Martell, in Dorne, had old grievances with the crown over Elia's fate. Those alliances would be crucial. "We cannot let the realm fracture again," Rhaegar said, scanning the territories. "If House Tully remains aloof, if House Arryn stands defiant, and if the Stormlands do not accept the new order, all our efforts at peace will be in vain. We must send envoys. Offer them fair terms." A knight, Sir Glendon, frowned. "Your Grace, do you truly think they'll heed envoys after the burning of certain lords in King's Landing? Some have heard rumors that the king means to punish all traitors with fire." Rhaegar's lips thinned. "That is precisely why we must make it clear that I, on behalf of House Targaryen, will ensure fair treatment if they submit and end hostilities. Else they'll believe only the worst rumors about the king." Ser Jon Darry nodded, his jaw set. "I can lead a small delegation to River Run. The Tullys might yet be persuaded. They do not have the same rancor as House Stark." Rhaegar agreed, though unease prickled at him. He gave instructions for the envoy to ride out within 2 days, carrying letters sealed with the prince's own signet. At the same time, he resolved to watch for any sabotage from within the Red Keep. Aerys might see these diplomatic maneuvers as a threat, or he might ignore them in pursuit of his own schemes. Rhaegar found himself in the precarious role of peacemaker, shackled to a tyrant who wielded the final authority. At midday he shared a quiet meal in his private solar, but the peace was short-lived. Word arrived that King Aerys had summoned his council, commanding the presence of the prince and his principal advisors. Rhaegar set aside his half-eaten bread and made his way to the council chamber in haste. He entered to find Aerys in a black mood, pacing near the table. The lords who formed the small council flinched at every turn of the king's head. Varys hovered close, a polite smile on his lips, while Grand Maester Pycelle wore an expression of sympathetic unease. Chelstead the Hand stood to one side, hands clasped behind his back. The pyromancer, Rossart, lurked by the corner in pale green robes, eyes gleaming. Rhaegar took in the tension like a man stepping into a room reeking of smoke and knowing a fire raged somewhere close. Aerys barely glanced at him. "My dear son arrives." "Good. We speak of traitors, the ones who remain hidden in the city. I have word there are plots to open the gates to the Starks if they march south. I must root out these conspirators. Burn them before they can deliver my city to the wolves." Pycelle cleared his throat. "Your Grace, might we consider a more measured approach? Already the city has endured much. Fear of the flames grows daily." Aerys rounded on him with a snarl. "Fear is what keeps the rats in check. Were you not the one who once advised caution when the traitors first rose? Your caution nearly cost us the throne?" He shoved past the old maester, causing Pycelle to stumble. Rossart's grin twitched at the corners of his mouth. Rhaegar stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Father, the rebellion is all but ended. Robert Baratheon is dead. The others are scattered. Surely now is the time for mercy, so that any lingering rebels might surrender without dread." "Menin." Aerys's eyes sparked dangerously. "Mercy? Mercy is for the weak, and I have been made to look weak for too long. You speak of mercy because you pity them, or because you fear them." He stopped, a hand drifting near Rossart's shoulder. "But do not worry. We have the means to defend ourselves. When the enemy comes, we shall give them a welcome of green flames so bright, it will be sung of for 1,000 years. All of them burned to ash, so that House Targaryen alone remains." "Listening? Yeah." Rhaegar felt his heart lurch. He glanced at Chelstead, whose knuckles had gone white around the rim of his belt. "Father," Rhaegar said softly, trying to keep his voice calm, "the city is full of innocent people. Your loyal subjects. If you use wildfire within these walls, you will slaughter thousands." Aerys sneered. "A small price to pay if it denies the city to traitors." Then he turned abruptly, directing his words to Rossart. "See that the caches are ready, good pyromancer. Double them if you must. I will not have half measures. The day the rebels dare to scale my walls will be the day King's Landing becomes their funeral pyre. Nedum pain. A hush fell, broken only by the crackle of the hearth at the room's edge. Rhaegar struggled to keep his composure. Everything he had feared was unfolding. If the king had his way, the city would be rigged to explode at the first sign of an invading force. The entire populace would be at risk. Chelstid cleared his throat. Your Grace, might we discuss more subtle ways to secure the city? Ziga defenses, negotiations. Aerys whirled on him, the corners of his mouth twitching. You question me, Hand? Are you so eager to join the others who have felt my flames? Chelstid bowed, swallowing hard. I only suggest we weigh the cost. Aerys spat onto the floor, eyes wild. The cost is what I demand. I am the king, anointed in the light of the seven, and my enemies will burn. He jabbed a finger in Rhaegar's direction. If you are truly my son, you will not hinder me. Unless you believe yourself more fit to wear this crown. Rhaegar took a deep breath. His father's delusions were laid bare before every council member present. I only hope to spare the innocent, Rhaegar said, his voice carefully controlled. That is our duty. The silence pulsed. Then Aerys waved an abrupt hand. All of you, out, except for Rossart. I have details to discuss with him. Go, plan your little negotiations if you wish. But remember, the city is mine to burn or spare. The council fled as if escaping a raging beast. Rhaegar left with them, though he cast a final glance over his shoulder. Seeing Rossart step closer to the king, the green glow of wildfire dancing in the man's eyes like a promise of doom. Outside, in the corridor, the lords looked at one another with unease. Chelstid's expression was taut with anger and fear. Pycelle dabbed his brow with a trembling handkerchief. Varys offered no words, only a small, inscrutable smile before he disappeared into the shadows. Rhaegar clenched his fists. If there was any doubt left about the danger they faced, it was gone now. The king's madness threatened the entire city. If the rebels truly reformed and marched on King's Landing, thousands of lives would be snuffed out in an inferno. The war was not over, it had only shifted. Rhaegar realized that it might fall to him to do the unthinkable, remove his own father from the throne by force, for the sake of the realm. But how? The Targaryen loyalists, among the common folk, still saw the king as anointed, no matter how mad. And the king's guard, bound by oath, would not turn on the king lightly. Some might if they saw the necessity, but others would remain loyal to Aerys until death. He retreated to his chambers, mind swirling with the enormity of what lay ahead. No sooner had he entered than Chelstid arrived, face set in grim lines. He closed the door with shaking hands. Your Grace, he said, voice hushed. I fear the king will not be dissuaded. He's ordered more wildfire readied beneath the Guildhall of the Alchemists, the Dragon Pit, even the Sept of Baelor. If the city is breached, he means to ignite them all, with no regard for the innocents. Nanistawn. Rhaegar closed his eyes for a moment. He saw the capital in his mind's eye, wreathed in an apocalyptic green glow. We cannot allow it, he said, each word quietly final. We must act. Chelstid's lips parted in an unsteady breath. That path. It means treason, my prince. Even a suggestion of it might lead the king to burn us ahead of schedule. Rhaegar nodded. I know. But if the alternative is the destruction of King's Landing, I must prevent it. He looked at Chelstid, at the lines of weariness etched on the old man's face. Will you stand with me, if it comes to that? We must gather those in the King's Guard we can trust. Ensure the city watch does not turn on us. We must do this swiftly and carefully. Chelstid gave a solemn nod, his voice catching. For the realm I will do it, though I fear the consequences. The king, his retribution if we fail. Rhaegar placed a reassuring hand on the man's arm. We will not fail. We cannot. Our cause is just. We do this not to seize power, but to save the realm from madness. He forced steadiness into his tone, though he could feel his heart pounding. I will speak with Sir Barristan, Sir John Derry, and others I trust. But for now, say nothing. Keep your eyes open, and if the king gives new orders, find me at once. Chelstid bowed and slipped away, Rhaegar stood alone, the enormity of the plot forming in his mind. Even if Aerys was dethroned or removed, the realm would remain fragile. Stark and Arryn might see it as a partial victory, but old grudges might remain. Tywin Lannister's ambitions could flare. The Targaryens' grip on power was more tenuous than ever. Yet to do nothing was to let the king's madness consume them all. A sharp rap at the door startled him. One of his personal guards, a knight of moderate rank, entered with an urgent expression. "Pardon me, my prince, but the gold cloaks have just found an infiltrator at the city gates. A man riding under a false banner. They suspect he might be an envoy from the north, or worse." Rhaegar felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The timing was suspicious, to say the least. Where is he now? They have him in the outer courtyard, under guard. He's asked to speak only to the prince. He claims he bears a letter from Eddard Stark. At that, Rhaegar's breath caught. Could Ned Stark truly have sent an envoy so soon? Or was it a trap contrived by some cunning opportunist? Still, he could not let the chance pass to learn what the North intended. "Take me to him," he said. He strode through the corridors, flanked by the guard. Their footsteps echoed against the stone. The distant hush of the keep seemed to close in around them. When he emerged into the courtyard, he saw a group of gold cloaks forming a ring around a travel-stained man who wore ragged leathers, more suitable for a huntsman than for a formal envoy. His hood was pushed back, revealing a lined face with a scraggly beard. He held himself with a certain guarded defiance, as if expecting hostility at any moment. Rhaegar approached, and the gold cloaks parted. The man knelt, though it was more an acknowledgement of the prince's status than an act of homage. "Your Grace," he said, voice rough. "I come on behalf of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell." Rhaegar gestured for the gold cloaks to stand aside. "Speak. What would Lord Stark have me hear?" The man looked wary, glancing at the watchful guards. He drew a folded parchment from his tunic. "My lord bade me deliver this only to you, in private if possible. He says your victory over Robert changes little, unless you can prove you mean peace. The North will not forgive the atrocities committed by the king." Rhaegar swallowed, aware that the king was likely watching from some hidden vantage or would soon learn of this. "Give me the letter," he said. The man held it out. Rhaegar took it. The seal was unmarked by wax. Only a crude bit of string bound it closed. He broke it, unfolded the parchment, and began to read. Stark's words were straightforward, heavy with grief and anger at Robert's death, but also carrying a hint of possibility. He accused Rhaegar of kindling the war by taking Lyanna. He spoke of the madness of Aerys, the brutality that had befallen Brandon and Rickard Stark. He vowed that the North would never kneel while Aerys lived, not without absolute assurances of reform and justice. Yet, among these dark declarations was a cautious invitation. If Rhaegar could remove the Mad King and atone for the harm done to the Starks, Ned would stand down and spare the realm further bloodshed. Otherwise, Ned warned, he would call the banners again, and the war would rage on. It was a stark choice indeed. Rhaegar's pulse hammered. Eddard Stark's letter might be a personal testament of everything that had gone wrong in the realm, a ledger of old wrongs that demanded resolution. Only the removal of Aerys would satisfy him. Rhaegar folded the parchment, his throat tight. The man who had once been the quiet friend of Robert Baratheon was now poised to become the realm's greatest threat, unless Rhaegar took a step that would damn him in the eyes of many Targaryen loyalists. He raised his gaze to the envoy. "Tell Lord Stark that I have received his words. I will consider them. But let him know that nothing can be done rashly. If he truly wants peace, he must give me time." The man dipped his head. "I will carry your message, my prince." Before the gold cloaks could drag him away, Rhaegar gestured. "Give him leave to go. He came under a flag of parley, even if false. Let him ride out safely." Nebner Natch. The captain of the gold cloaks looked doubtful, but acquiesced, stepping aside. The envoy gave Rhaegar a last searching look, then turned and walked out, escorted to the gate. Rhaegar wondered if Ned Stark would read his words as sincerity or as delaying tactics. A part of him yearned to reassure the Northmen that he genuinely intended to end the madness, but how could he guarantee that while the king still drew breath? He stood in the courtyard, holding the letter in his hand, tasting the tension in the air. The future of the Seven Kingdoms hinged upon a choice that no man should have to make. Either protect his father, the king, and preserve a monstrous rule that might engulf the city in flame, or commit the ultimate betrayal for the greater good. He closed his eyes and saw again the memory of Robert Baratheon on the Trident, blood glistening from the lethal wound Rhaegar had dealt. One more monstrous act. Would it free the realm from ruin, or condemn it to unending strife? The letter crinkled in his hand. He realized the hush around him had grown too deep. The gold cloaks were watching, uneasy. He forced himself to straighten. Then he made his way inside, shoulders tense, carrying the folded parchment like a thing alive. Decision pressed upon him. The realm trembled on a razor's edge, and in the gloom of the Red Keep's corridors, he thought he heard echoes of distant laughter. Echoes of a time long past, when music and jousting filled the days, and they believed in the better angels of House Targaryen. Now, that seemed a dream half forgotten, overshadowed by the looming specter of a king's madness, and a son's duty to save them all, whatever the cost. Rhaegar left the courtyard with Ned Stark's letter weighing heavily in his grasp, every footstep echoing across the stone. The gold cloaks parted for him in silence, none daring to question the prince's private thoughts. He kept the parchment folded and hidden in his hand, mindful that watchers might be everywhere. In the corridors, braziers crackled with dull flames, casting flickers of light along the vaulted ceilings. The hush of the Red Keep pressed in. Each guard or servant he passed paused to dip their head, but the tension in their shoulders spoke of fear. Rumors of the king's madness were no secret. He climbed a staircase toward his apartments, intending to lock away the letter before anyone could pry. But he paused halfway up when he heard the purposeful steps of Sir Barristan Selmy behind him. The Kingsguard knight caught up and gently touched the prince's arm. Rhaegar turned, inclining his head in acknowledgement. They exchanged no words in the open. Rhaegar silently gestured for Sir Barristan to follow him into a nearby solarium, a small room with tall windows overlooking a courtyard garden. The air smelled faintly of herbs and lemon blossoms, a dissonant contrast to the grim tension that clung to them. Inside, a pair of simple chairs stood by a carved wooden table. Rhaegar closed the door behind them, then turned to face the knight. Sir Barristan studied him, concern etched in every line of his face. "Your Grace, I heard of the envoy who arrived. The men say he carried a letter from the north." Rhaegar nodded. He did. From Lord Eddard himself. He slipped the folded paper from his sleeve. Barristan's gaze flickered to it, but he did not attempt to read. "He demands that if the realm is ever to know peace, my father must be removed. He will not kneel while Aerys lives." Barristan exhaled. "That is no small demand. And the king's temper grows more unhinged each day. I fear that if he discovers such a letter exists..." His voice trailed off. "We will be plunged into new catastrophe." Rhaegar met his eyes. "I know, but we cannot destroy the letter. Nor can we pretend the realm is stable. The king plots to burn King's Landing if the rebels approach. This was confirmed to me by Lord Chelsted, and even hinted at by the king himself. We stand on a precipice." "Oh?" Sir Barristan bowed his head, his white cloak sliding off one shoulder. "I have served the crown my entire life, first under Jaehaerys, then under Aerys. But my vow is also to protect the innocent. I cannot stand idle if the king orders the city put to flame." Rhaegar closed his eyes for a moment, relief washing through him that the Kingsguard knight understood. "Your loyalty honors you, and the Kingsguard. There may come a day soon when I must rely on your support to stop my father before it is too late." Barristan did not hesitate. "I am yours, my prince. My oath to the king does not compel me to obey madness. If the city stands in peril, I will do what must be done." "Nan." Rhaegar heard the vow's weight, felt it settle over them both. He nodded, placing a hand on Barristan's mailed forearm. "For now, we must keep our plans quiet. If the king suspects, we have all seen what he is capable of. We will wait. We will watch. we will ensure that no spark ignites his wildfire." Barristan agreed, then slipped away to attend his duties. The moment he departed, the solarium felt strangely empty. Rhaegar stepped to one of the tall windows. He gazed down into the courtyard garden, where a few servants knelt among the herb beds, pulling weeds or trimming back overgrown leaves. Beyond the castle walls, the sprawl of King's Landing could be glimpsed, a chaos of cramped streets and pale smoke drifting upward from cook fires. The city was uneasy, that much was certain. He tucked Ned's letter back into his sleeve, then left the solarium and made his way toward his own chambers. Along the route he passed a group of servants carrying linens, their faces averted. The tension he sensed in them mirrored his own. Even the hush of conversation in the halls had a stilted quality, as if everyone waited for the next outburst from the king, or the next dreadful order that might condemn them all. Word traveled fast that the prince had parleyed with a northern envoy, and speculation simmered like a pot on the hearth. In his chambers, Rhaegar secured the letter behind a secret panel in the heavy oak wardrobe. He had discovered the compartment as a boy, a hidden recess once used by a queen of a previous generation to store private missives. When the letter was safely concealed, Rhaegar sank onto a cushioned bench, pressing his hands together. His eyes roamed the space. How different these rooms felt from his youth, when the Red Keep had been a place of wonder and prestige. Now it seemed like the lair of a caged beast. A sudden wave of longing for Lyanna seized him. He imagined her face, recalled the brightness in her eyes. That first time he truly beheld her at the tourney of Harrenhal. She had been as fierce as winter wind, a woman of the north who felt stifled by courtly traditions. He had thought himself guided by prophecy, by the sense that she might be a key to the future of the realm. Yet all that had led to bloodshed and heartbreak. Robert's death still weighed on him, along with the guilt of everything that had spiraled out of control. He rose abruptly, unable to find solace in idle reflection, and decided to walk the halls. Better to keep moving, to see with his own eyes how the keep functioned in this climate of dread. He passed through a corridor hung with moth-eaten tapestries, depicting long-dead Targaryen monarchs. At the end of it, he encountered Grand Maester Pycelle, who stood fussing with a ring of keys near a locked door leading to one of the treasury chambers. At the prince's approach, Pycelle inclined his head. "Your Grace, may I be of any service?" His tone was obsequious, but Rhaegar could see the fear in his watery eyes. "Service?" Rhaegar repeated quietly. "What can you tell me of the king's health, Grand Maester?" Pycelle swallowed. "He is strong in body, if that is your question. But his moods are erratic. Often he rails against conspiracies, speaks of seeing traitors in every shadow. I have tried to administer potions to ease his humors, but he grows furious if I suggest he might be unwell. I fear he will not accept my help." "Then?" Rhaegar nodded in resignation. "Even so, continue to watch over him. If you find a moment when you can calm him, do so. The realm needs him placid." Pycelle bowed repeatedly. "Of course, my prince. I shall do all that is within my ability." Rhaegar sensed the man's eagerness to placate any power figure. Pycelle was not the sort to stand on principle if it meant risking his own position. Yet in times like these, even that kind of self-interest might be useful. Rhaegar needed eyes near the king, and Pycelle, for all his flaws, was at least a presence in the council that might moderate the king's mania. After a polite nod, he continued on his way, leaving the maester behind. He followed a smaller corridor that wound to an exterior walkway along the Red Keep's curtain wall. The sea breeze off Blackwater Bay ruffled his silver hair. In the distance, gulls circled, their cries mingling with the faint clamor of the city below. Soldiers stood at intervals along the battlements, crossbows in hand, scanning the horizon for signs of approaching armies or rebel ships. Their watchful eyes gave him a respectful glance, and he acknowledged them with a slight nod. He wondered if any among them knew that the greatest threat to King's Landing already dwelled behind the city's walls. He paused at a vantage point where the mouth of the Blackwater rush opened onto the bay. Cargo ships drifted, their sails half furled, braving the uneasy times in hope of profit. He let his gaze wander toward the hazy horizon. He knew that, somewhere out there, Stannis Baratheon brooded on Dragonstone, uncertain how to respond to Robert's death. and the new reality of a Targaryen victory. And far to the north, Eddard Stark readied men for a possible second uprising. If the king's tyranny persisted, all across Westeros, lords who had once thrown their lot in with Robert Baratheon now faced a grim choice: bend the knee to a mad king or risk annihilation by the crown's forces. A soldier cleared his throat behind Rhaegar, drawing him from his thoughts. The prince turned. It was one of the royal guards stationed near the parapets, a veteran whose face bore the scars of many battles. He saluted, then spoke in a subdued tone. "Your Grace, there is a messenger from the City Watch who seeks you in the main yard. He says it is urgent." Rhaegar nodded his thanks and followed the soldier back down the winding steps. Each echoing footfall reminded him of how precarious his footing was in the greater scheme. He could feel the tension thrumming through every corridor, as if the stones themselves held their breath. When he emerged into the yard, he found a lean, middle-aged man in half-plate waiting anxiously. The insignia of the City Watch gleamed on his surcoat. He made a quick bow. "Your Grace, we have received troubling reports from the slums near Flea Bottom. Small folk speak of seeing flames in the night, men in black hoods creeping about. There is talk that the Alchemists' Guild has been carting barrels down side streets, under heavy guard. The Watch did not intervene for fear of crossing the king's direct orders, but the people are fearful. They say the very ground smells of sulfur." "No, Rhaegar's jaw tightened. This could only mean that Rossart and his pyromancers were ferrying wildfire to strategic points, preparing for Aerys' doomsday scenario. "Have there been any explosions or accidents?" "Not yet, Your Grace, but the watchmen suspect it's only a matter of time. The small folk whisper that if so much as a spark touches those barrels, half the city might burn." Rhaegar absorbed the man's words, feeling the urgency coil in his gut. He glanced around at the soldiers within earshot and lowered his voice. "Thank you for bringing this to me. I will ensure the king is made aware of the people's concerns." The messenger hesitated. "Your Grace, I beg pardon. Speaking to the king might be dangerous. If he believes the Watch is questioning his methods, he may do something rash. But the men want to protect the innocent." Rhaegar gave a grim nod. "I understand. Keep watch as best you can. Report any further movement of those barrels to me directly. If an accident seems imminent, do what you must to safeguard lives." The man visibly relaxed at that, relief mingled with worry on his face. "I will, Your Grace. Thank you." Then with another bow he departed, leaving Rhaegar in the yard. He stood there amid the bustle, stable hands ferrying horses, squires carrying fresh lances, a handful of noble courtiers crossing from one tower to another, and felt a cold certainty settle over him. There would be no easy resolution. Aerys was arming the entire city as a trap, one spark away from catastrophe. And yet, Rhaegar alone could not swiftly remove his father without risking a backlash from loyal Targaryen supporters or from confused lords who might see it as usurpation. His path lay in careful alliance building. He decided to convene a discreet meeting that evening, in his private solar summoning Sir Barristan, Lord Carlton Chelstead, Sir John Derry, and a few others he trusted. Under the cover of twilight, they gathered, some arriving singly and others in pairs, ensuring no undue attention was drawn. The group assembled around a table lit by a single oil lamp. Rhaegar shut the door and instructed the guards outside not to admit anyone else. Chelstead opened the discussion. "My prince, I have spent the day reviewing the king's new orders. He demands that the Alchemists' Guild triple their production of wildfire. He's assigned Rossart to oversee the distribution of these barrels across key points of the city. I have the documents if you wish to see them, though I fear it will only confirm our worst suspicions." "Yun." Rhaegar nodded for him to continue. "We must know how far this has gone." Chelstead spread out a parchment that listed various cryptic references. Cellar vaults, storerooms near Flea Bottom, even hidden tunnels under the Dragon Pit. They have not yet placed all the caches, but the plan is well advanced. At Rossart's current pace, we may have enough wildfire stored to incinerate every district of King's Landing within a fortnight. Ser John Darry let out a low curse. Barristan said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw spoke volumes. Rhaegar leaned over the table. We cannot allow that to happen. The king's madness grows with each day. If the realm sees us do nothing, we will be complicit in this potential atrocity. Chelstead lowered his voice. Your Grace, we risk not only the city, but your own position. Aerys's spies are many. If he hears talk of us planning to thwart him, he may act first. I fear for the Queen as well, and for your children. The king's wrath might fall on any he deems suspect. Danorn. Rhaegar's thoughts flickered to his mother, Queen Rhaella, who spent much of her time in seclusion. She had endured years of Aerys cruelty, including the brutal ways he had treated her during her pregnancies. He imagined her in her chambers, hearing the rumors, living in constant dread. Then he thought of his own children, though their fates too were overshadowed by the king's madness. We must move carefully, but we must move, Rhaegar said quietly. He glanced around at the men gathered. Will you stand with me if we are forced to act against the king, to prevent him from destroying the city? Ser John Darry's face was solemn. I serve the crown, your grace, but I will not stand by if the king means to burn the realm. I will do my duty to protect the people. Barristan echoed that resolve. We are sworn to guard the royal family, but that oath does not compel us to assist in an atrocity. The other men present added murmurs of agreement, though fear laced their voices. Rhaegar let out a breath. Then we must prepare, but do nothing rash. We wait for the proper moment, some sign that the king truly intends to ignite these caches, or that the rebellion threatens the gates. Then we intervene. In the meantime, we gather what allies we can, discreetly. Is that understood? They all nodded. Chelstead looked almost relieved to have direction. I will keep watch on Rossart's deliveries. If they finalize their placements in a certain district, I'll know. Then we can see about quietly disabling them. Maybe sabotage. If some of the barrels are found to be faulty or vanish, we can reduce the scope of this madness. Burr. Rhaegar agreed. Though a part of him knew that once Rossart realized sabotage was afoot, he would raise alarms. Perhaps that might even trigger the king's final meltdown. Still, they had to try. Their talk shifted to lesser concerns, betting for the men, ensuring the loyal knights were positioned near the critical areas, ways to keep up the facade of normalcy. The hush of the keep at night pressed upon them, as though it listened to every word through the stone walls. Eventually, they dispersed, each man slipping out at staggered intervals. Ser Barristan lingered, waiting until only he and Rhaegar remained. He placed a gauntleted hand on Rhaegar's shoulder. I only pray the king does not suspect. Take care, your grace. You are the hope the realm needs now. Rhaegar offered a weary smile. You give me too much credit. Let us hope fate is not so unkind as to take that hope from us. After Barristan departed, Rhaegar sat alone, staring at the guttering flame of the oil lamp. The conversation replayed in his mind. He thought of the letter from Ned Stark, resting in its hiding place. Could removing Aerys truly heal the kingdom's wounds? Or would it shatter House Targaryen for good? The realm had been battered by war already. If the future required him to seize the throne before his father could burn the city, he might find himself ruling a land still seething with resentment, its lords suspicious of any Targaryen claim. Perhaps the only path forward was to show mercy, to rectify old injustices. And what of Lyanna? Her presence, if revealed, would pour salt on those wounds. Rhaegar felt the questions swirl, each as tormenting as the last. He extinguished the lamp. Darkness enveloped him. For a long while, he sat unmoving, feeling the pulse of the Red Keep around him, as if the stones breathed with pent-up fear. At length, he rose, found his bed, and lay down, though sleep eluded him until the night was nearly spent. In the early hours, he dreamed disjointed visions of a tower rising from mist-shrouded hills, of a child's cry echoing through torchlit corridors, and of a dragon devouring its own tail in an endless loop of flame. When morning arrived, he woke with a start, sweat slick on his brow. He rose and dressed swiftly, summoning what energy he could muster to face another day. Soon enough, he found himself in the king's presence once more. Aerys held court in the throne room, perched on the iron throne like a spindly spider. Courtiers gathered in anxious clusters below the dais, each jostling to show their loyalty. Varys hovered near the foot of the throne, offering whispered counsel. Rossart stood to one side, hands folded in his green-stained robes. Rhaegar approached, forced once again to adopt the mask of a dutiful son. Several minor petitions occupied the morning. A dispute over shipping rights in the Blackwater. A complaint from a lesser lord about a stolen stallion. King Aerys listened with disinterest, occasionally snapping at Pycelle for droning on. Rhaegar did his best to appear attentive, though his mind lingered on the barrels hidden in the city's underbelly. Midway through the session, a herald announced the arrival of a visitor, a courier from Storm's End. The courtiers stirred. With Robert Baratheon dead, the Stormlands faced a succession crisis. The courier, dressed in the sigil of the fiery heart of House Baratheon, though with the crowned stag absent, stepped forward, bowing deeply. "In the name of Lord Stannis Baratheon, I bring a message for his grace, King Aerys." The man's voice shook slightly, as though he understood well the danger of speaking in this hall. Aerys' lip curled, but he gestured impatiently. "Speak it then, worm." The courier swallowed. "My Lord Stannis acknowledges the passing of his brother Robert Dott. He is prepared to reaffirm his loyalty to the crown, provided his rights as Lord of Storm's End are recognized and that House Baratheon is not punished further for the recent rebellion." "These honor." The king's eyes narrowed dangerously. "So the younger stag bleats for mercy. He dares to bargain with me?" His voice rose. "I might have demanded his head for following his brother's treasons. Perhaps I still shall. Where is Stannis now?" The courier shifted. "He resides at Dragonstone, Your Grace, overseeing the fleet. He requests assurances that the crown will not seek retribution for his brother's acts. He has not raised his banners since Robert fell. He hopes for a peaceful accord." Then, Rhaegar felt the tension coil in the air, as if the entire throne room held its breath. If Aerys flared into a rage, Stannis might be driven to some desperate act. Barristan and Chelstead watched from the sidelines, clearly anxious. Rhaegar decided to interject before the king could unleash a torrent of threats. "Father," he said, stepping forward, "Lord Stannis did not lead the rebellion. He merely held Dragonstone to protect his family's interests. If he will now bend the knee, that is a show of good faith. We might benefit from welcoming the Stormlands back under the crown's aegis." Aerys turned his head slowly, and for an instant, Rhaegar wondered if he had overstepped. But the king merely sneered. "You speak of welcome as if we were equals. Very well. I shall consider it. But Lord Stannis must prove his loyalty. I will not trust any Baratheon so easily after what his wretched brother attempted." "Damn it, Wartorn." The courier bowed again, clearly relieved that no immediate condemnation had been pronounced. "I will relay your words, Your Grace." Aerys waved a dismissive hand. "Out of my sight, and tell your master to send gold ships, something of real value, if he craves my favor." The man withdrew swiftly, and the tension in the hall subsided into a low murmur. Aerys shot Rhaegar a glance sharp as knives, as though daring him to contradict this pronouncement. Rhaegar remained composed, inclining his head in acceptance of the king's unspoken challenge. It was, at least, not an outright rejection. If Stannis Baratheon could be brought into the fold peacefully, that might prevent another front of rebellion. Court resumed its routine, hearing minor cases until midday. Rhaegar stood by, offering measured input when appropriate, but otherwise letting his father preside as he saw fit. When the session ended, the king descended the throne, his white hair hanging in tangled strands around his shoulders. He gestured for Rhaegar to walk with him. The courtiers parted in a rush, giving them space. Rhaegar's pulse fluttered. He could not predict what the king wanted now. Aerys led him through a side passage into a private gallery overlooking the training yard. From the narrow windows, they could see men-at-arms drilling with spears. The king gazed at them with restless energy, picking at the skin around his fingernails. Rhaegar waited in taut silence, bracing for the lash of madness. "You speak well, my son," Aerys said softly. "Always so careful, so measured, so beloved by the small folk, so full of your songs and your compassion." He turned, and his eyes glowed with that familiar mania. "But I know the seeds of treason hide behind soft words. You would make a kinder king, would you not?" Rhaegar kept his expression neutral. "I have no such ambition, father. I only wish to see the realm strong." Aerys's lips peeled back in a grin. "Strength? Strength is fear. To rule, one must be feared. Did I not teach you that? Did you not see how the rebels multiplied when they thought us weak? How they spat on our name until we answered with dragonfire? And now they cower again. That is the only truth that matters. Now." Rhaegar held his breath, uncertain how to respond. At length he said, "Fear may bring obedience, but it does not bring love." Aerys laughed, a brittle hollow sound. "Love is worthless in the face of betrayal. My father was loved by many, yet they would have betrayed him too in time. Our blood is the blood of dragons. We take what is ours with fire and blood. All else is childish fancy." He paused, running his tongue over dry lips. "I see the way your knights flock to you, Rhaegar. I hear the whispers. Do not think I am ignorant. You think to use them against me." Rhaegar forced himself not to react, though his heart pounded. "I have sworn no oath against you, father." Aerys slid close, a bit of spittle at the corner of his mouth. "You have not. But I see your pity, your weakness. Keep your mercy to yourself, or it will devour you when the time comes to show true strength." Then he turned abruptly toward the window, laughing under his breath. "These men below, they would kneel to any conqueror who showed them a big enough stick, a large enough flame. They care nothing for you or me." Rhaegar couldn't speak. The sickness in the king's words, the paranoia, the utter disregard for any loyalty but fear, it chilled him to the bone. He glanced down at the yard, where unsuspecting soldiers thrust spears into straw dummies. They were men with families, men who likely had never desired anything more than a decent wage and a safe city. If the king had his way, they might all be burned alive on some terrible day. Eventually, Aerys let out a weary sigh, as if the mania had briefly ebbed. "Go on then," he muttered. "Begun with you. I have business to attend with Rossart." He flicked his hand in dismissal. Rhaegar bowed slightly and retreated, every instinct urging him to escape the king's presence. He walked briskly down the corridor, hearing the king's faint laughter echo behind him. Each step felt as if he were walking deeper into a labyrinth, with green fire smoldering at every turn. That afternoon, Rhaegar kept mostly to his rooms, penning letters to key lords. He intended to maintain a semblance of normal governance, requesting updates from the Reach, from Highgarden and Old Town, and from Dorne. The realm must see that some measure of stability still existed. He phrased each letter carefully, hinting at the possibility of a future, shaped by a more reasonable hand. He knew these messages might be read by the king's agents, so he couched them in enough official courtesy to avoid outright suspicion. He also penned a private note, addressed to Prince Doran Martell, who had cause to resent the Targaryens after what had befallen Aelia Martell, Rhaegar's wife, and the abuses she had endured in the final years. Although she was still alive, tensions ran high between Dorne and the crown. Rhaegar could not afford to ignore that. He wrote with care, acknowledging the difficulties, expressing regret for his father's cruelty, and suggesting that if Dorne was willing to stand with him in an effort to restore peace, they could mend old wounds. Once done, he sealed it with his personal sigil, separate from the official Targaryen seal that the king might scrutinize. As dusk fell, Rhaegar felt fatigue pressing heavily, but there was no time for rest. Reports came in from Chelsted that Rossart had ordered a large consignment of new wildfire to be taken to the Dragon Pit. Barristan relayed that the City Watch had discovered more barrels hidden within the cellars near the guild halls. The day ended with these dark tidings overshadowing any fleeting hope. Rhaegar retired to bed, only after conferring again with Sir John Derry, quietly planning how to move trusted knights to guard certain passages. It was a delicate dance. They had to maintain appearances, not alarm the king, and yet be ready to thwart a catastrophic move. Another restless night passed, haunted by flickering dreams of green flames devouring the city. When dawn came, Rhaegar rose, and resolved to do something he had not done in many moons. He would ride into the city proper, beyond the Red Keep, to walk among the small folk and see the mood for himself. The risk was real. Spies and cutthroats lurked, and the king might rail against his son mixing with commoners. But Rhaegar needed to see the real face of King's Landing. He donned a plainer cloak over his fine clothes and asked only a small escort of trusted men, hoping not to draw too much attention. They slipped out through the iron gate in the morning hours, weaving past wagons laden with produce from nearby farms. The city streets were cramped, many dwellings half-rotted or leaning against each other for support. Children ran barefoot, and vendors hawked their wares in sing-song shouts. But there was a pall over everything, as though people whispered rumors of doom. As Rhaegar and his men passed through Flea Bottom, a stench of waste and unwashed bodies rose, clinging to the narrow alleys. They saw a few scuffles between ragged men fighting over scraps, and the locals eyed the prince's retinue with anxious wariness. Many recognized Rhaegar's silver hair and murmured to each other, unsure whether to cheer or shrink away. A group of beggars hastened to kneel, thrusting out grimy hands for coin. Rhaegar paused, distributing some silver stags, quietly reminding them to use it for food. Further on, they reached a spot where a cluster of tumble-down structures had burned recently. Charred wood and ash marked the ground. Rhaegar questioned a bystander, an older woman whose face was lined with sorrow. She said the fire had started in the night, likely from one of those devil's barrels. The alchemists carted around. She had seen men in dark cloaks rolling them through the alley, telling folk to clear away. She didn't know whether they had been sloppy or sabotage was afoot, but one of the barrels ignited, causing a small explosion. 2 families died in the blaze. Rhaegar felt sick. This was exactly the kind of accident he had feared. He handed the woman some coins, urging her to find shelter. She thanked him tearfully, but her gratitude was overshadowed by the wail of a child standing at her side. Smoke still lingered in the alley, acrid and clinging. Rhaegar felt the stares of passers-by settle on him, some angry, some pleading, all of them fearful. He realized how precarious the crown's position truly was. If more barrels went up, the city might riot or worse. He continued on, leading his escort through the crowded byways until they reached the Street of Steel, where blacksmiths hammered out swords and armor. Even here, the mood was subdued. The clang of metal had a hurried, desperate tone. Blacksmiths glared at each other, each suspicious of sabotage or ill intent. Overhead, seagulls wheeled, cawing as they scavenged scraps. Rhaegar approached one of the forges, watching as a smith shaped a bent sword. Nearby, racks of half-finished blades stood waiting. In the corner, the smith's apprentice, a boy with soot on his face, recognized the prince's features and abruptly bowed, nearly dropping the tongs he held. Rhaegar asked the smith how business fared. The man answered in a gruff monotone, saying orders were plentiful, but coin was scarce and many lords paid in promises instead of silver. He also complained that supplies of good steel were harder to come by with the roads unsafe. Then, seeing Rhaegar's expression, he trailed off, unsure whether to speak freely. "Go on," Rhaegar prompted quietly. "If there is more to say, speak it." The smith exhaled. "Word is, we'll all burn if the rebels come knocking. People say the king wants to turn King's Landing into a pyre. Some are fleeing, heading west or north despite the war. They say it's safer than being here when the wildfire blows." Rhaegar's heart clenched. He heard the faint accusation in the man's tone, that the royal family would let the city burn. Not everyone knew the difference between king and prince. To most, they were all Targaryens. Rhaegar slipped him a silver coin, murmuring a thanks, and moved on. The dread in the city was palpable, each district whispering the same fear. Eventually, he led his small company toward the great Sept of Baelor, atop Visenia's hill. White marble steps ascended to grand doors flanked by statues of the Seven. Inside, the air was dim and incense-laden. Devotees knelt in prayer. Rhaegar noticed a pair of septons whispering in hushed urgency, their faces grim. The faith had not been spared the rumor that wildfire might be stored beneath even sacred structures. Rhaegar approached them, introduced himself softly. They bowed, crossing their arms in supplication. He asked if the Sept had seen men from the Alchemists' Guild. One of the Septons, a slight man with kind eyes, confirmed that strangers in dark green robes had inspected the cellars some days ago, claiming to be on royal orders. They had not revealed their purpose, but the Septons feared the worst. Rhaegar offered vague assurances that he would do what he could, but it felt hollow against the enormity of the king's scheme. He left with a tightening in his chest, heading back toward the Red Keep as twilight approached. The city's gloom did not lift. If anything, it deepened, as though the setting sun cast every nook in deeper shadow. Upon returning, Rhaegar convened once more with Chelstad and Sir Baratheon. He recounted what he had seen. The charred remnants of a small explosion, the talk of men fleeing the city. Chelstad listened gravely. Baratheon's expression hardened. They agreed that sabotage or some reckless mistake had already cost lives. This might only be the beginning. Chelstad proposed trying to quietly remove certain key barrels under cover of night, but Rhaegar hesitated. It could trigger suspicion and a violent reaction from the king. The tension between doing nothing and risking everything pressed on them all. As they debated, a knock sounded at the door. One of Rhaegar's guards cracked it open, admitting a nervous page who held a sealed parchment. He bowed, apologizing for the interruption, then presented the message. Rhaegar recognized the crest at once. A martel, sun and spear. He broke the wax seal and read, the others watching him intently. It was from Prince Dorne himself. A cautious but hopeful response. Dorne wrote that he was willing to parley with Rhaegar in secret, provided the prince could guarantee that the madness of the king would not harm Elia or her children. There was sympathy for the tragedies that had befallen the realm, along with an undercurrent of tension. Dorne would not commit to open rebellion or war, but it also would not stand by if the king's cruelty worsened. Rhaegar folded the parchment with a thoughtful expression. This might be the opening he needed, an alliance that could help stabilize the realm should he move against Aerys. Dorne's support, combined with the potential neutrality of the Tyrells, could keep the south from exploding into chaos. But forging such an alliance would require trust, and the king's watchful eyes would be everywhere. He informed Chelstad and Barristan of the letter's contents. Barristan stroked his chin. If you could secure Dorne's backing, it would give you leverage. The lords of the Stormlands might also fall into line if Stannis sees that you have powerful allies. It could prevent further bloodshed. Now, Chelstad, however, looked worried. If the king learns of this negotiation, he might accuse you of conspiring with traitors. Dorne's loyalty has long been suspect in his mind. Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly, picturing how Aerys would react, possibly with fire and curses, raving that his own son plotted to bring foreigners and rebels against him. Yet the chance to forge a path to peace was too valuable to ignore. We must do this discreetly, he said at last. I will pen a reply to Prince Dorne, suggesting a neutral meeting place, or at least establishing a channel of communication beyond the king's eyes. They agreed. Rhaegar dismissed the page, instructing him to be ready for further errands. Then Chelstad and Barristan left to manage their own tasks, cautioning Rhaegar to take care. Once alone, Rhaegar sat at his writing desk, spreading a fresh parchment. By the light of a single candle, he began to draft his response to Dorne, choosing his words with precision. He emphasized his desire to protect Elia, to see the realm at peace, and to prevent the king's worst impulses from harming countless innocents. He did not mention the plan to remove Aerys. Not openly, but the subtext was clear. If Dorne would stand with the prince, then together they might prevent further atrocities. He sealed it with his personal sigil once more, and set it aside, intending to dispatch it by a trusted courier. Fatigue threatened to dull his senses, but he forced himself to remain alert. Outside, the corridors lay quiet. He could almost sense the hush of sleeping courtiers, the shuffle of guards on their rounds. Somewhere high in the Red Keep, the king likely paced, conferring with Rossart, planning new horrors. Rhaegar's candle guttered, casting the dancing shadow of a man caught in a choice that would define history. He rose and walked to the window, letting the night air cool his face. Distantly, he could see the city's lights flickering like scattered fireflies. He found himself remembering the dream he'd had of a tower in the mist, of a child's cry. So much had brought him to this point. Prophecy, love, duty, regret. And still he stood, trying to chart a course that would save a kingdom from the flames. At length he turned from the window, poured himself a cup of watered wine, and took a sip, wishing it could banish his thoughts. He knew he would not rest easily tonight, or any night until the king's threat was ended, one way or another. Pushing aside the fear, he sat again and began drafting letters for the envoys who would ride out at dawn, each one a thread in the tenuous web he hoped to spin. House Tully, House Tyrell, House Martell, even cautious overtures to House Lannister. The future of Westeros might hinge on their responses. If enough houses stood behind Rhaegar, when the moment came to stop Aerys, perhaps the city could be spared. Perhaps a new dawn could rise from the ashes of war, rather than from a pyre of wildfire. He wrote until his hand cramped, then finally set down the quill. The candle had burned low, nearly to the base. In the silence, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. He thought of Ned Stark's ultimatum, of Robert's face twisted in pain as he fell on the trident, of Lyanna's voice in his memory. The swirl of it all threatened to crush him, but he clenched his jaw and steeled himself. Whatever came next, he would not shrink from it. The realm deserved better than the tyranny of a mad king, deserved better than endless bloodshed. If fate had placed the burden on him, then he would bear it, even if it demanded the unthinkable. Rising slowly, he extinguished the candle, letting the darkness settle once more. The Red Keep seemed to breathe around him, a monstrous shape in the night. He could not know if the days ahead would bring alliance or betrayal, life or death. All he knew was that the final confrontation with Aerys drew closer, an inevitable clash as unstoppable as the tide. He left the letters carefully arranged for his most trusted couriers, then slipped beneath the covers of his bed, eyes heavy. Tomorrow would be another day of secrets, negotiations, and the slow dance of treason, forced upon him by a father who had long since lost all mercy and reason. Sleep took him in fits, haunted by the flicker of green flames and the memory of Robert Baratheon's final breath. In his dreams, he walked a corridor of broken rubies, each step echoing with distant screams, each door he opened revealing a mirror that showed him his father's twisted reflection. Morning would come, and with it, the necessity of action. Yet for now, in the hush before the dawn, the prince could only cling to the hope that somewhere in the darkness, a path still led to salvation.